This story happened to me back in 2012. At the time, I was 23 years old, freshly out of my parents' house and excited to finally live on my own. I didn't have a lot of money, so when I found a small 2-story rental on the edge of town for way less than I expected, it felt like a blessing. The house was old, but not in ruins. The paint was faded, the wood creaked when you walked across the floors, and the basement had that earthy smell of damp stone. But overall, it looked livable. What really stood out, though, was the location. Behind the house, there wasn't a normal backyard. Instead, there was a narrow dirt trail that sloped downward into a thick wall of trees. It was a forest that looked endless at night, dark, heavy, and somehow watchful. No fence, no clear property line, just grass that faded into wilderness. I asked the landlord if wild animals ever came close. He shrugged and said, "You'll hear raccoons sometimes. Maybe deer. But don't worry. They usually keep their distance." The way he said usually stuck in my head, but I let it go. At the time, I just felt lucky. A place that cheap? I signed the lease without hesitation. The first few days were fine. I spent time setting up my room, unpacking, and enjoying the silence. My job wasn't too far, maybe a 20-minute drive, and after long shifts I liked that I could come back to a quiet place, free from neighbors' noise or traffic. The only thing that felt slightly off was how quickly the house got dark. Even before sunset, the forest behind seemed to swallow the light, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside, the rooms always seemed dim, like no bulb was strong enough. Still, I convinced myself it was just because the house was old. I didn't think too much of it until the first time I heard the noises. It was a Thursday night, about 2 weeks after I moved in. I stayed up late, scrolling on my laptop in bed. Around 2:50 a.m., I started hearing this faint rustling outside, like leaves shifting under footsteps. I froze for a moment, listening. Maybe it was a raccoon, or the wind, but the sound seemed rhythmic, like someone slowly circling the house. Then, at exactly 2:57 a.m., it stopped. Dead silence. I remember glancing at the clock, thinking it was weird how precise it was. But I didn't dwell on it. I shut the laptop and forced myself to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. Rustling at 2:50, silence at 2:57, and then 3 sharp knocks. They came from directly beneath my bedroom window. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. My chest tightened so badly I could barely breathe. I didn't move an inch, just sat there in the dark staring at the wall. After maybe 30 seconds, nothing else happened. No footsteps walking away. No more noise. Just silence. When morning came, I told myself it had to be a branch hitting the wall, or maybe pipe shifting. The house was old, after all. Old houses made noises. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The knocks returned the following night. Always at 2:57. Always 3 times. Sometimes they were light, almost playful. Sometimes they were so hard they rattled the glass. I stopped sleeping well. By the 5th night, I was jumpy, irritable at work, guzzling coffee just to function. Finally, I decided to stay awake on purpose and see what was causing it. That was a mistake. I turned off all the lights in my room that night, left the blinds cracked just enough to see outside, and sat in bed waiting. The rustling started right on schedule at 2:50. My heart was pounding so loud I could feel it in my throat. At 2:57, the knocks came, 3 heavy thuds against the wall. I forced myself to lean toward the blinds and look. There, standing at the edge of the porch light's reach, was a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its shoulders were narrow, its body thin, almost stretched. It didn't move at all, didn't even seem to breathe. The faint yellow glow from the porch bulb lit just enough for me to see that its clothes were strange, loose, old-fashioned, like something out of the early 1900s. The face was hidden in shadow. I stared, frozen. And then, as if responding to me, the figure tilted its head upward. Slow, deliberate, until I knew, without doubt, it was looking straight at my window. I scrambled back from the blind so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My breath came in short gasps, and for a solid minute I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even blink. When I finally dared to look again, the yard was empty. But I knew what I'd seen. And that night, For the first time, I realized something. The knocks weren't random. They were intentional. Someone, or something, was trying to get my attention. The next morning, I walked into work like a zombie. My co-workers joke about me looking half dead, but I didn't have the energy to laugh. All I could think about was the thing I saw in the yard the night before. I kept asking myself if it was just my imagination. Maybe I was so sleep-deprived that I hallucinated. But hallucinations don't knock. They don't rattle glass with their fists. By the time I drove home that evening, I had made up my mind. I needed answers. Talking to the landlord. I knocked on my landlord's door around 7 p.m. He was an older man, maybe late 60s, wiry and stooped but still sharp in the eyes. When I asked him directly if anyone had ever complained about strange noises in the house, he didn't answer right away. He just stared at me with his tight-lipped expression, like I had asked something I shouldn't have. Finally, he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "You're not the first to ask," he said. "Other tenants, well, they didn't last long." I felt my stomach sink. "What do you mean, didn't last long?" He waved his hand dismissively. "They left, some in the middle of the night. Wouldn't even bother to return the keys. Just drove off." "Why?" I pressed. His eyes flicked toward the woods behind my house. For a second, it looked like he didn't want to say it. Then he stood up and disappeared into another room. When he came back, he was carrying something, an old leather-bound book, frayed at the edges, its spine cracked with age. "This was left in the basement when we first bought the place," he said. "You might as well have it." I took it, confused. The cover was plain, no title, just scuffed brown leather. When I opened it, the yellowed pages smelled of dust and mold. Scrawled handwriting filled every line, neat at first but slowly devolving into frantic, jagged script. The name at the top of the first page was Elias Carter, dated 1923. The journal entries. That night, instead of sleeping, I sat at my kitchen table with the journal. The early entries were harmless. Elias wrote about his job at a mill, his wife's poor health, and how they had moved into the house by the woods because it was cheap and quiet. But by the middle of the book, the tone shifted. He described hearing strange knocks at night, always around the same time. 3 raps at the window, as though a polite guest were asking to come in. I felt my chest tighten as I read further. He described shadows that lingered at the tree line, figures he could barely make out in the dark. Sometimes he thought they were people. Other times, he wasn't sure. The entries grew more frantic. It waits until 2:57, then knocks. Always 3 times. I cannot escape the hour. I cannot sleep. I saw it tonight. Tall, thin, wearing clothes I do not recognize. It has no eyes. God help me, it has no eyes. The final entry sent chills down my spine. It will not stop knocking. If I let it in, perhaps it will leave me be. Tonight, I shall open the door. And then, nothing. The pages after that were blank. The whisper at the door. That night, I stayed awake in bed, clutching the journal to my chest. I told myself it was just the ramblings of a paranoid man from 100 years ago. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. At 2:50, the rustling began outside again. Leaves crunching, grass shifting, the slow, deliberate pacing of footsteps circling the house. At 2:57, the knocks came. Knock, knock, knock. I squeezed my eyes shut. My chest was tight, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Then, silence. But this time, it didn't stop. A few seconds later, I heard it, the faintest whisper, muffled by the door but unmistakably human. "Let me in." The voice was raspy, dry, almost pleading. I bolted upright, my throat constricting with terror. I stared at my bedroom door, imagining something on the other side of the front door, standing in the dark, waiting. Then it came again, louder this time. "Let me in." The air in the room felt colder, pressing against my skin. My body screamed to run, to hide, but I couldn't move. The peephole. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I crept downstairs. My legs felt like lead. The house was dead silent except for the faint creak of the floorboards under my feet. When I reached the front door, I leaned against it, trembling. Through the peephole, I saw nothing at first, just a dark porch and the edge of the yard lit by the weak bulb overhead. And then it moved into view. The tall, thin figure, its face closer now, its head tilted upward as though it sensed me watching. I could see its features this time, or rather, the lack of them. Its eye sockets were hollow pits of darkness. Its mouth was too wide, stretched unnaturally, lips cracked and dry. It placed one pale, bony hand flat against the door. Slowly, gently, like it didn't want to scare me. And then, in that same rasping whisper, I heard it again. "Let me in." My vision blurred with tears. Every instinct told me to scream, but I knew if I made a sound, if I acknowledged it, I might not survive the night. So I stumbled back, clutching my chest, shaking uncontrollably. The whispering stopped. The hand slid off the door. And just like that, silence. The footprints. At dawn, when I finally found the courage to step outside, I expected to see nothing. Maybe I could convince myself it was all a dream. But in the dirt, leading from the forest to my porch, were bare footprints. Long, narrow, human-like. They came right up to my front step. But there were no footprints going back. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the living room with every light turned on, gripping a kitchen knife even though I knew it would be useless. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every flicker of the porch light made my stomach twist. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay another night. I stuffed my clothes into duffel bags, grabbed my laptop, my wallet, and tossed everything haphazardly into the trunk of my car. I didn't even care about the deposit I'd lose. Money didn't matter anymore. I just wanted to leave that cursed house behind. But before I left, I forced myself to take one last look at the yard. The footprints were still there, clear as day, ending at the porch steps. But overnight, they had multiplied. Instead of one trail, there were now several, different sizes, different shapes. Like more than one figure had stood outside my house, waiting, watching, knocking. My throat went dry. I slammed the car door shut, turned the ignition, and drove away without looking back. Or at least, I tried not to. The return of the knocks. I stayed at a friend's place for a few nights. I didn't tell him everything, just that the house was too creepy and I needed to crash until I figured things out. He laughed, cracked jokes about me being afraid of raccoons, and let me use his couch. For a while, I thought it was over. But on the third night, something happened. At exactly 2:57 a.m., I woke up to a sound. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps against the window behind his couch. I shot upright, heart hammering. My friend snored in the other room, completely oblivious. Trembling, I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. There it was, the tall figure, standing in his yard now, closer than ever. Its hollow eyes locked directly onto mine. It didn't move, didn't blink, just raised one long arm and tapped the glass again. Knock, knock, knock. I yanked the curtain shut and nearly collapsed on the floor. It had followed me, research and desperation. The next day, I drove back to the landlord. I slammed the journal onto his table and demanded answers. He just shook his head. "You shouldn't have read it," he muttered. "What do you mean?" I snapped. "You invited it. Once you know about it, once you acknowledge it, it doesn't stay at the house. It stays with you." I felt sick. So what do I do? How do I get rid of it? He looked at me with a grim expression. No one ever has. That night, I didn't go back to my friends. I checked into a cheap roadside motel. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew, but I didn't care. At least it had heavy curtains and no forest outside. I left the TV on for background noise, curled up in bed, and told myself maybe I could outrun this thing if I kept moving. But deep down, I already knew the truth. At 2:57 a.m., the knocks came again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, they came from inside the room's bathroom door. The breaking point. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly. My memory is fragments, heart racing, chest tightening, the sound of my own scream. I bolted from the room barefoot, sprinted down the motel hallway, and didn't stop until I was outside in the freezing night air. The clerk at the front desk saw me shaking and pale, and asked if I was okay. I wanted to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come out. How do you explain something like this? I drove aimlessly for hours after that, just trying to stay ahead of the sunrise. Everywhere I went, I felt it. In the rearview mirror, in the shadows of parking lots, on the side of the road. And when I finally pulled into a rest stop to catch my breath, I noticed something that made my stomach twist into knots. On the driver's side window of my car, in the condensation left by my breath, were 3 small smudge marks, as though someone had knocked from the outside while I was driving. Knock, knock, knock. The present. It's been years since then. I've moved half a dozen times, changed jobs, changed states. I don't stay in one place too long anymore, hoping maybe if I keep moving, it won't find me, but it always does. Every so often, I'll wake at exactly 2:57 a.m., my heart already racing, as though my body knows before my mind does. And then, without fail, knock, 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 always 3 times, always deliberate, always followed by silence so heavy it feels like the world is holding its breath. Sometimes it's at the window, sometimes the door. Once, it was the headboard of my bed. I don't know what it wants. I don't know what happens if I ever let it in. And I don't want to find out. The only thing I know for certain is this. When you hear the knocks, 3 times, always at 2:57, don't answer. Because once you do, it never stops. This happened to me in 2015, when I was 26 and trying to save money while finishing grad school. The cheapest option I could find was a small studio apartment on 7th Street, inside an old brick building that had probably been standing since the 1940s. It wasn't much, just a narrow hallway that opened into one main room with a tiny kitchen tucked in the corner. The bathroom door was warped, so it didn't quite close all the way, and the radiator clanged in the middle of the night. But it was mine, and it was affordable. The landlord was a distracted guy who barely looked up from his phone when I signed the lease. I remember asking if the apartment was safe, because the building had an odd feel, like the air was heavy inside, like the walls absorbed sound. He just said, "You'll get used to it," and handed me the keys. For the first week, I tried to settle in. I worked during the day, studied at night, and used noise-canceling headphones to block out the radiator and the occasional shouting from the street below. But little things started happening that I couldn't ignore. The first night of odd sounds. On my 3rd night there, I was brushing my teeth when I heard footsteps above me. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth. At first, I thought nothing of it. Old buildings carry sound. But the strange thing was, I lived on the top floor. There was no one above me. I stood there with a toothbrush still in my mouth, foam dripping down my chin, just listening. The steps were steady, moving across the ceiling from one corner to the other. Then they stopped directly above the bathroom. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I spat into the sink, turned off the light, and practically ran into bed. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just pipes creaking, or maybe sound traveling weirdly through the building. That explanation lasted until the following night, because the footsteps came again. Same time, same slow pace. And again, they stopped right above me. The closet door. By the 5th night, something new happened. I had a small closet in the corner of the room, barely big enough to hold my jackets and a few boxes. I always kept the door shut, mostly because it was so cramped that it felt unsettling to leave it open. That night, after the footsteps ended, I was lying in bed trying to calm myself down when I heard a faint click. The closet door had opened. Not all the way, just a few inches. Enough to make the darkness inside look deeper than it should have been. I stared at it for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. Finally, I got up, heart hammering, and pushed it shut again. I even dragged a chair in front of it, just in case. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a soft creaking noise. The chair had shifted. The closet door was open again, wider this time, asking the neighbors. The next day, I knocked on the door of the woman who lived down the hall. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen everything already. I asked casually if she'd ever heard noises in the building. She gave me a long look and said, "You're in 4C, aren't you?" I nodded. Her mouth tightened. "Don't worry about the noises," she said, and then closed the door. But the way she said it made my skin crawl. The shadow by the window. That night, I stayed up late again, determined to prove to myself that it was all in my head. I sat at my desk with my laptop open, music playing softly, and tried to focus on my assignments. At 2:45 a.m., the footsteps started. Slow, deliberate, right above me. I froze, staring at the ceiling. Then came the faint creak of my closet door, even though I had jammed the chair against it again. But the worst was yet to come. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement by the window. When I turned my head, I saw a shadow figure standing there, darker than the night outside. Tall, thin, motionless. Its head was tilted slightly, as though it was studying me. I blinked, thinking it was just my reflection, or maybe a trick of the streetlight. But no, the streetlight was behind it. This shadow was inside the room. Before I could move, before I could even scream, it faded back into the darkness. And then, as if mocking me, I heard the closet door creak fully open behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. By morning, my eyes were bloodshot, my hands trembling. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't afford to. Rent was cheap, and moving again wasn't an option. So I told myself I'd survive it somehow, even though I knew, deep down, that whatever was in that apartment wasn't going to let me. And worse, it was only just beginning. The whispers in the walls. I tried to convince myself that what I had seen by the window was just exhaustion, stress from school, too much caffeine, and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew better. The shadow hadn't been a trick of the light. It had been real, too real. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it seemed to get. Night of the whispers. 3 nights later, the footsteps returned. This time they weren't pacing. They were circling, slow, deliberate, dragging across the ceiling as though something up there knew exactly where I was. I lay in bed, clutching the blanket up to my chest, when a new sound joined them. A whisper. At first, I thought it was coming from the hallway, but then I realized the whispering wasn't outside. It was inside the walls. Dozens of overlapping voices, too faint to make out clearly, murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. Sometimes they rose in unison, like they were chanting. Sometimes they dropped into a frantic, overlapping hiss. The sound pressed against my ears, made my skin crawl, and I covered my head with a pillow just to block it out. But the whispers only grew louder. And then came a clear voice, right against my ear, as if someone was crouched beside the bed. His watching. I tore the pillow away and sat up. The room was empty. The closet door stood open again, though I was sure I had pushed the chair back against it before lying down. The smell. The next day at work, my boss asked if I was sick. He said I looked pale, hollow. I laughed it off and told him I just hadn't been sleeping well. But when I came home that evening, I noticed something new. The apartment smelled. It wasn't the normal old building mustiness I had gotten used to. It was a sharp, metallic scent, like rust or dried blood. I cleaned every inch of that studio, scrubbing the sink, the shower, even moving the fridge to check for leaks. Nothing helped. The smell seemed to seep from the walls themselves. And worse, it was strongest near the closet. The woman down the hall. I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on the old woman's door again. When she opened it, she looked at me with an expression that was almost pity. Before I could say anything, she sighed. "You've seen it, haven't you?" My throat went dry. "Seen what?" Her eyes shifted down the hall, as if she was afraid of being overheard. Then she said, "The man in the closet." Chill shot down my spine. She pulled me inside her apartment and shut the door quickly. Her place was cluttered but warm, filled with old furniture, shelves of porcelain figurines, and the faint smell of lavender. She made me sit down and then told me everything. Years ago, a man had lived in my apartment. Foresee. No one knew much about him, only that he was quiet and kept to himself. Until one night, when the building was filled with screams. By the time anyone got into his unit, the man was gone. But in the closet, they found stains. Dark stains that soaked into the floorboards and never really went away. She lowered her voice. Some say he brought people back there. Some say he worshipped something that lived in the walls. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as some kind of urban legend. But the look on her face was deadly serious. Before I left, She gripped my arm tightly. "If you stay there," she whispered, "don't let him think you're afraid. He feeds on fear." The return. That night, I pushed my desk in front of the closet door. I piled boxes, chairs, anything I could to block it. Around 2:30 a.m., the footsteps started again, circling above me, slow, patient, like a predator waiting for the right moment. The whispers followed, louder this time, almost frantic. My head throbbed trying to block them out. And then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I sat there, clutching the edge of my blanket, staring at the barricaded closet. The metal lamp on my desk rattled once, twice, and then toppled to the floor with a crash. I jumped, heart pounding, and that's when I realized the chair against the closet door was moving. Slowly, deliberately, as though something was pushing from the inside. The pile of boxes trembled, then one slid off. Another tipped over. My makeshift barricade collapsed piece by piece until the door creaked open an inch. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And through that crack, I swear I saw something pale, like a hand, slide against the doorframe before vanishing into the darkness again. No escape. I slept with the lights on until sunrise. The next day, I went to the landlord and demanded answers. He brushed me off, saying tenants always complained about strange noises in old buildings. When I pressed him harder, his face tightened. "All I'll tell you," he muttered, "is don't go digging in that closet. You don't want to know what's in there." He walked away before I could ask more. That night, I considered sleeping in my car, but exhaustion dragged me back to the apartment. I told myself I'd just get through one more night and figure it out later. I double-checked the locks, shoved the dresser against the closet, and left every light on. And for a few hours, it worked. I dozed off around midnight, comforted by the brightness of the room, until the lights went out, all at once, as if someone had flipped the breaker. And from the closet came the sound of breathing, slow, heavy breathing, in and out, filling the silence of the dark. What lives in the closet? I didn't move when the lights went out. I didn't breathe when the first rasping sound filled the room. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the radiator or the pipes. It was breathing, coming from the closet. I sat frozen on my mattress, every muscle in my body screaming to run, but my legs felt locked in place. The darkness pressed against me, heavier than anything I'd ever felt, and then came the creak of the closet door slowly opening. This time, there was no barricade, no chair, no boxes, no dresser. Somehow, without me noticing, it had all shifted aside. The door opened wider. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, desperate for light. The screen glowed weakly, illuminating the room in a pale blue cast. And that's when I saw it. A figure crouched inside the closet. It was too tall to be in there comfortably, its head bent at an unnatural angle against the frame. Its skin was pale, almost gray, stretched thin over long bones. Its eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. Hollow, sunken, but shining faintly as a reflecting a light I couldn't see. It didn't move at first. It just stared at me. And then, slowly, it smiled. The voice. I dropped my phone in shock, and the screen went dark. The room plunged into total blackness again. From inside the closet, the thing spoke. Not in whispers, not in chants. In a voice low and rasping, but horribly clear. "You let me in." My mouth went dry. My thoughts scrambled. No, I never. The floorboards creaked as it shifted, its long fingers curling around the edge of the doorframe. "You opened the door. You looked at me." The memory of that night by the window slammed into me. The shadow that had stood and watched, the closet that kept opening on its own. Had I invited it somehow, just by acknowledging it? The voice grew sharper. "You belong to me now. Fight or flight." I don't know where the burst of courage came from. Maybe pure survival instinct. But I lunged for the lamp on the floor and slammed it against the wall until the bulb flickered back on. The room lit up in a weak yellow glow. The closet was empty. My chest heaved, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the lamp upright. But the door was still wide open, and the smell, the metallic, coppery stench, was unbearable now, strong enough to make my stomach turn. I leaned closer, against every screaming instinct, and saw something on the floorboards. Dark stains. Not fresh, but old, seeped into the wood, and carved into the back wall of the closet were words, scratched deep as though by nails. "He is still here." Breaking point. I couldn't stay another second. I threw some clothes into a backpack, grabbed my keys, and ran out the door barefoot. I didn't even lock the apartment behind me. When I stumbled into the hallway, the old woman was standing there as though she'd been waiting. Her expression was grim. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered. I couldn't answer. I just nodded, tears stinging my eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest and said, "You can leave this building, but he won't forget you. Once he chooses someone, he follows." Her words were like ice water down my spine. The last night, I slept in my car that night, parked 2 blocks away, too afraid to go back. But sleep didn't protect me. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of fingernails scratching along the inside of my windshield. Long, slow drags across the glass. I bolted upright, fumbling for the keys, and that's when I saw the reflection in the rearview mirror. The pale figure was sitting in the back seat. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs. And there was nothing, just the empty back seat, dark and silent. I drove until morning, too scared to even stop for gas. The aftermath. I never went back to that apartment. I forfeited my deposit, left my furniture, my dishes, everything behind. The landlord didn't argue. He didn't ask why. It was as if he already knew. I found another place on the other side of town, a newer building with clean walls and bright lights. But even here, the shadows don't feel safe. Some nights, when I'm lying in bed trying to convince myself it's over, I hear it again. The footsteps above me, the whispers in the walls, the slow creak of a closet door I know for certain I locked. And sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I hear that same rasping voice against my ear. "You let me in." College dorms are supposed to feel alive. Music down the hall, doors slamming, late-night laughter echoing through the building. But the dorm I moved into during my sophomore year was different. The building itself was old, one of the original brick structures on campus, built in the 1920s. The school had done some updates over the years, fresh paint, new carpets, upgraded locks, but the bones of the place were ancient. I was assigned to room 319, a corner unit on the 3rd floor. My roommate was a guy named Aaron, who I'd only met once before move-in. He seemed laid back enough, quiet, glasses always slipping down his nose, more into gaming than parties. Honestly, he was the kind of roommate I hoped for. But from the first night, we both knew something was off. The cold spot. Move-in day had been chaos. Hauling boxes up the stairs, arguing over which side of the room would take, plugging in fans to fight the late summer heat. By midnight, we were exhausted, so we collapsed onto our beds without much talking. Sometime after 2 a.m., I woke up shivering. The room wasn't just cool, it was freezing. My breath fogged faintly in the air. I sat up and pulled the blanket tighter around me, confused. The window was shut, and the radiator wasn't even on yet for the season. That's when I noticed Aaron stirring, too. He sat up in his bed across the room and whispered, "Dude, do you feel that?" I nodded. We both looked toward the center of the room where the cold felt strongest. It wasn't like the whole dome was drafty. It was just that spot, an invisible column of ice cutting through the middle of our room. We laughed it off at the time, joking about ghosts turning on the AC. But I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my stomach. The girl in the hole. A few days later, I was coming back from a late study session. The halls were quiet, dimly lit by buzzing fluorescent bulbs. Most people were asleep. As I turned the corner toward our room, I saw a girl standing halfway down the hall. She wore a long gray sweater and had dark hair that hung in front of her face. At first, I thought she was just another student up late. But something about her posture was wrong. She was standing too still, her head tilted slightly downward like she was staring at the carpet. I muttered a quick hey as I walked by, but she didn't answer. When I reached our door, I glanced back. The hallway was empty. Aaron's nightmare. The next morning, Aaron looked awful, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. When I asked what was wrong, he hesitated before saying, "I had this dream, or at least I think it was a dream." He said he woke in the middle of the night to see someone standing between our beds. At first he thought it was me, but then he realized the figure was too tall, too thin. Its head almost brushed the ceiling. He told me the figure leaned over him, whispering something he couldn't make out. The air was so cold his teeth chattered. When he tried to move, he couldn't. He was paralyzed. Finally, the figure bent so close that its hair brushed his face, and in a voice that didn't sound human at all, it hissed, "Get out!" That's when he woke up for real, drenched in sweat, his blanket on the floor. I tried to reassure him. Night terrors, sleep paralysis, whatever explanation I could find. But deep down, I felt the same creeping dread. Because while he was telling me his story, I realized something. At the exact time Aaron had his nightmare, I had been lying awake on my bed, staring at the ceiling, too uneasy to sleep, and I swore I heard whispering in the dark. The whisper game. By the second week, things escalated. A group of us, me, Aaron, and 2 friends from down the hall, sat in our room one Friday night playing video games. Around 1 a.m., one of the guys, Mark, joked that we should try the whisper game he'd heard upperclassmen talk about. According to the legend, if you turned off the lights, sat in silence, and whispered questions into the air, sometimes the dorm would answer. We all laughed, but eventually someone flipped the switch, plunging us into darkness. "Is anyone here with us?" Mark whispered. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, from the corner of the room where the cold spot always lingered, came a reply. A whisper. It was too soft to understand, but it was definitely there. The 4 of us froze, staring at each other wide-eyed. Aaron scrambled for the light switch, but when it flicked on, the room was empty. Mark swore he heard the whisper say his name. The scratches. The next morning, Aaron and I woke to find something new on our wall. 3 deep scratches, carved into the plaster just above the headboard of his bed. We touched them. They were real. Not paint peeling. Not cracks. Fresh gouges. Aaron paled. "It was standing right here," he whispered. I didn't argue. I couldn't, because I knew we weren't just imagining things anymore. And worse, whatever lived in that dorm didn't just want our fear. It wanted us gone. Whispers after midnight. The scratches above Aaron's bed didn't fade. We tried scrubbing them with cleaning solution, even painting over them with an old candy I found in the supply closet. By the next morning, the gouges had returned, darker and deeper. That was when Aaron stopped sleeping in his own bed. He dragged his mattress to the middle of the floor and pushed it up against mine, as if the extra 2 feet between us and the wall would make a difference. It didn't. The girl returns. 2 nights later, I saw the girl in the gray sweater again. It was almost 3 a.m., and I was stumbling back from the vending machines on the first floor. The hallway was deserted, the hum of the soda machine still in my ears, when I stepped onto the 3rd floor and froze. She was standing at the far end of the hall, her face still hidden by her dark hair, the same gray sweater, the same stillness. I whispered, "Hello," but she didn't respond. I started toward her slowly, each step echoing on the old wooden floorboards. But the closer I got, the more wrong she looked. Her hair wasn't just messy, it was soaking wet, strands dripping onto the carpet. Her sweater clung to her body like it had been pulled out of a river. I stopped 10 feet away. Her head twitched, and for a split second, I saw her face. Pale, bloated, lips tinged blue, eyes wide and unblinking, staring directly into mine. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet, and when I looked up again, she was gone. The hallway was empty. I ran all the way back to room 319, chest heaving, vending machine snack forgotten on the stays. Mark breaks. The next morning, Mark showed up at our door, looking worse than either of us. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. "I can't do this anymore," he muttered. He told us that ever since the whisper game, he hadn't slept through a single night. Every time he closed his eyes, he'd wake to the sound of someone whispering his name. Sometimes it was right at his ear, sometimes from under his bed. The night before, he swore he felt someone's icy hand grip his ankle and yank him half off the mattress. He was transferring dorms by the end of the week. But here's the thing, leaving didn't help. We still saw him around campus, but Mark was never the same. He'd flinch at shadows, refuse to talk about room 319, and dropped out at the end of the semester without explanation. Research. After Mark left, Aaron and I started asking questions. Most students brushed us off, but one senior who worked in the library seemed to know more. He told us that decades ago, the dorm had been co-ed, and a girl had gone missing from the third floor. Some said she drowned in the river off campus. Others said she'd been attacked in the building itself. The truth was never confirmed, but students claimed her ghost still wandered the halls, searching for her room. Aaron leaned across the table, whispering, "What was her name?" The senior lowered his voice. "Margaret, but everyone called her Maggie." When we got back to our room, Aaron opened his desk drawer and pulled out the candy bar wrapper he'd been saving from the vending machine. His hands shook as he held it up. Scrawled across the wrapper in smeared black ink that hadn't been there before, was one word: Maggie. Sleep paralysis. After that, things escalated quickly. Aaron was the first to suffer. One night, I woke to him gasping, eyes wide open but unable to move. He was frozen on his mattress, chest rising and falling in shallow bursts, lips trembling as though he was screaming silently. I shook him until he finally snapped out of it. He bolted upright, drenched in sweat. "She was sitting on my chest," he whispered hoarsely. "Her hair was dripping on my face. She kept saying my name over and over." I told him it was sleep paralysis. I told him his mind was tricking him. But the truth was, I had seen it too. For a brief second, while I was shaking him, I glimpsed something perched on top of him. A shadow of a woman, bent forward, long hair falling across his cheeks. And when she turned toward me, her mouth opened too wide, water spilling down her chin, before she vanished. The writing on the wall. By mid-October, our grades were slipping. We barely slept, skipped classes, and lived in a constant haze of fear. Then the walls began to change. It started small, faint smudges on the plaster near the closet, shapes that looked almost like words. But soon the smudges grew clearer. Letters scratched into the paint. "Help! Drowned! Find me!" The final message appeared one Friday night while Aaron was in the shower. I was alone in the room when I heard scratching from behind the wall. Not faint, loud, desperate, like nails clawing from the other side. I pressed my ear against the plaster, heart hammering, and the scratching stopped. Then, in slow, deliberate strokes, the words carved themselves into the wall right in front of me. "You're next." The night after the wall carved the words, "You're next," neither Aaron nor I could stay in room 319. We tried to crash in the lounge downstairs, but the fluorescent lights flickered all night, and the vending machines hummed like a broken choir. Neither of us closed our eyes. By morning, we decided we couldn't keep living like this. We had two choices: leave the dorm, like Mark, or find out what Maggie wanted from us. Aaron, for reasons I still don't fully understand, chose the second option. And I followed him. The basement archives. We snuck into the basement that Saturday. The place reeked of mildew, with old cardboard boxes stacked against the stone walls, filled with yellowed yearbooks, broken furniture, and forgotten files. It didn't take long before Aaron found it, a faded student file labeled Margaret Ellis. Inside were grainy black and white photos, a shy-looking girl with dark hair and, yes, that same gray sweater. A note clipped to the file explained that she had drowned in the campus river after a party, officially ruled an accident. But in the margins of one page, someone had scrawled in red ink, "She didn't fall. She was pushed." My stomach turned. Aaron grabbed the file, determination flashing in his eyes. "She's not haunting us for no reason. She wants justice." I wasn't so sure. The locked door. Back on the third floor, we started checking every room. Most were occupied, but one at the very end of the hall, room 327, was sealed shut with a heavy padlock. The other students said it had been used for storage for years. Nobody had a key. That night, Aaron and I broke in with a crowbar borrowed from maintenance. The door groaned open, releasing a wave of stale, wet air. Inside, the room looked untouched since the 70s. Faded posters on the wall, a dusty dresser, a cracked mirror. But the worst part was the smell, like stagnant river water. On the floor, beneath a torn rug, we found deep scratches etched into the wood. Not random ones. Words. Let me out. Aaron turned to me, his face pale. This was her room. And then the temperature dropped. Maggie appears. The mirror in the corner began to fog, though the room was freezing. Slowly, words appeared on the glass, written by an invisible hand. I remember you. Aaron gripped my arm so tightly it hurt. She's here. The air filled with the sound of dripping water, though nothing in the room was wet. My breath came in clouds. And then she stepped out of the mirror. Maggie. Her sweater clung to her like seaweed, hair dripping across her face. Her eyes were glassy, filled with river water that spilled down her cheeks like tears. She looked more corpse than girl, but her lips moved, forming words we couldn't hear. Aaron whispered, "What do you want?" Her head snapped toward him, and in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater, she croaked, "Trade." The bargain. Before I could react, Maggie lunged forward, her wet hand slamming against Aaron's chest. He screamed as his body convulsed, eyes rolling back. I grabbed him, pulling him away, but her grip was impossibly strong. Her voice filled the room again, layered, distorted, like dozens of voices overlapping. One stays. One leaves. I shouted, "No? Take me instead." Her black, bloated eyes locked on mine. For a moment, everything froze. The air, the sound, even Aaron's thrashing. Then she whispered, "Next time." With a violent shove, she released him. Aaron collapsed to the floor, coughing, gasping for air. When we looked back at the mirror, she was gone. Only the words remained, etched deep into the glass. Debt unpaid. Aftermath. We left room 327 locked again, but nothing was the same. Aaron never spoke about what happened, but his health declined fast. Dark circles under his eyes. Weight loss. Jumpy at every shadow. By the end of the semester, he dropped out of school. I stayed, stupidly convincing myself it was over. But it wasn't. The last night, 1 month later, I was packing for winter break when I heard it. The sound of dripping water. Not in the bathroom, inside the room. I turned, and there she was. Maggie, standing by the wall above my bed, water pooling at her feet, hair plastered across her face. This time, she didn't hide. She stared directly at me, and her lips curved into a grotesque smile. On the plaster behind her, words appeared in dripping black streaks. "It's your tone." The lights flickered. The floorboard shook. I ran, leaving my bags behind, and didn't stop until I was outside in the freezing air. Epilogue. I never went back to room 319. I transferred schools the following semester, but sometimes, especially around 3 a.m., I still wake to the sound of dripping water. And in the corner of my darkened room, I sometimes see the outline of a girl in a gray sweater, waiting. Not gone, just patient. I hadn't been back to that house in over a decade. When my parents sold it after the divorce, I thought I'd never see it again. But life is a cruel way of circling back. My aunt passed away last winter, and to everyone's surprise, she'd left the old family home to me. The same creaky, 2-story house at the end of Willow Lane. The place I grew up in. The place where, as a kid, I swore I saw shadows moving where no one stood, heard whispers from rooms that should have been empty, and felt something watching me every night as I fell asleep. I told myself those were just childhood fears. But standing on the cracked driveway that chilly October afternoon, staring up at the shuttered windows and sagging roofline, I felt a wave of unease crawl up my spine. It didn't just look abandoned. It looked angry. The first night. The first thing that struck me after unlocking the front door was the smell. Not musty, like an old house should. No, this was damp, metallic, almost like rust mixed with soil. It reminded me of the basement, a place I never liked going even as a kid. Dust floated in the stale air as I dragged my suitcase inside. Every creak of the floorboards echoed through the hollow rooms. Most of the furniture had been left behind, an old couch in the living room, the dining table scarred with knife marks, and my childhood bed frame still upstairs. Time had frozen, but not in a comforting way. More like the house was holding its breath, waiting. That night, I unrolled a sleeping bag in my old bedroom. The moonlight slanted through half-broken blinds, and the wind outside rattled the siding. I should have felt nostalgic, maybe even comforted. Instead, I lay awake, heart racing at every sound. At 2:43 a.m., I woke to the distinct sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, dragging. I sat up, holding my breath, and the sound stopped right outside my door. I whispered, "Hello?" The silence pressed against me like a weight. I finally mustered the courage to flick on the lamp. The hallway beyond was empty, but when I looked back at my bedroom wall, my blood ran cold. In the dust coating the plaster, fresh finger marks trailed downward, as if someone had dragged their hand along the wall while standing right beside my bed. Childhood memories. The next morning, I explored the house in daylight, trying to shake off the unease. In the kitchen, I found the same faded wallpaper I used to peel the corners when Mom wasn't looking. In the hallway, the marks from when Dad measured my height each year were still etched in pencil. But not all the memories were good. I remembered how I used to wake screaming, convinced someone was in my closet. How Mom always told me it was just the pipes when I heard knocking in the walls. And how one night, when I was 9, I'd run into my parents' room sobbing that a man was standing in the corner of mine, watching. Dad searched, of course. He found nothing. But I never forgot the feeling of being stared at by something that wasn't supposed to exist. Now, walking through the same narrow hallways as an adult, I couldn't shake the same sensation. Eyes on me, always just out of sight. The basement. By the second day, I knew I had to face the basement. Even as a kid, that place terrified me. The wooden steps groaned with every footfall, the air grew colder with each descent, and the single dangling bulb barely lit the stone walls. This time was no different. The smell hit me first, damp earth and iron, stronger than anywhere else in the house. The shelves were still stacked with dusty jars my aunt used for canning. But it wasn't the shelves that caught my eye. It was a far wall. When I was a kid, that wall was plain cement. Now, faint scratches covered it. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Long, frantic gouges, like fingernails dragged across stone. I reached out, running my fingertips over one of the marks. It was deep, fresh. Something moved in the shadows behind me. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. For just a second, I thought I saw someone duck out of sight, a figure crouched low, scuttling toward the corner. But when I rushed forward, there was nothing, just broken shells and dust. Still, the sound lingered, a faint, rasping breath. I bolted back upstairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. The photograph. That night, I dug through boxes my aunt had left behind, desperate for distraction. Most were filled with yellowed receipts, books, and old trinkets. But at the bottom of one, I found a photo album I'd never seen before. Flipping through it, I saw pictures of my family through the years, birthdays, Christmas mornings, summer barbecues, smiling faces frozen in time. Then I turned to the last page and froze. It was a photo of my childhood bedroom, empty, except for one thing. In the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow, stood a tall figure, its face blurred, its head tilted, and its hand resting against the very same wall where I'd seen the finger marks the night before. The caption scrawled beneath in my aunt's handwriting chilled me more than the image itself. He never left. I shut the album, heart hammering. Suddenly, all the childhood fears, all the late-night whispers, all the unexplained shadows, they weren't just in my head. The house hadn't forgotten me, and whatever lived inside it still remembered. I barely slept after finding that photograph. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the old pipes made my body tense. But what truly kept me awake wasn't the house. It was the words written under the picture. He never left. Who was he? A voice in the dark. The second night was worse than the first. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of humming. A low, tuneless hum, like someone trying to remember a lullaby. I froze, ears straining. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my bedroom. I turned my head slowly, terrified of what I might see. There was nothing at first, just moonlight spilling across the floor. Then, from the corner of the room, the same corner in the old photograph, came a whisper. Not words, exactly, just breathy syllables, sharp and urgent, as if someone was trying to force speech through waterlogged lungs. I fumbled for the lamp, but before my hand touched the switch, the humming stopped. And the silence that followed was worse than any sound. Aunt Margaret's journal. The next morning, I knew I needed answers. I tore through every box in the attic until I found something buried beneath moth-eaten quilts, a leather-bound journal. My aunt's handwriting filled the pages. At first, it seemed like a diary. Grocery lists, neighbors' gossip, memories of holidays. But the later entries grew darker. He scratches at the walls again. The basement is the worst. Sometimes I think he's in there waiting for me. I tried to board up the closet. It doesn't matter. He always finds another way out. And finally, the last entry before she died. If anyone comes back here, tell them to leave. Don't stay. The house doesn't forget, and neither does he. My hands trembled as I shut the journal. Whoever he was, my aunt had lived with him for years. The closet. That evening, I decided to test the journal's words. I pushed open the closet door in my bedroom. It groaned on rusty hinges, revealing nothing but a few wire hangers and dust. Still, the air inside was colder. Heavy. I ran my hand along the back wall. To my horror, the wood felt uneven, soft in places, like it had been clawed at. When I leaned closer, I realized there were faint carvings in the wood. Not scratches. Words. Help me. Let me out. The final line was different, etched deeper, as if with deliberate force. His mine now. I stumbled back, slamming the closet shut, and that's when I heard it. A single knock from inside the closet. Then another, louder. And finally, 3 rapid bangs that shook the door. I didn't sleep in that room again. The neighbor. The next day, I went to speak with Mrs. Delaney, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. She had known my family for decades. Her face paled the moment I mentioned the house. "That place isn't safe," she whispered. "It never was. You were too young to remember, but your aunt, she wasn't the first to see him." I pressed her for details, and after a long silence, she told me what she knew. Back in the 1950s, a man had rented the house before my family owned it. A drifter, quiet, kept to himself. People said he was strange, always digging in the backyard at night. Then one day, he vanished. The landlord assumed he left town, but neighbors swore they still saw him wandering the halls at night, long after the house was empty. Some say he never left the basement, Mrs. Delaney said, lowering her voice. Others believe he attached himself to the house itself. But every family who's lived there since, they've seen him. I asked her what he looked like. Her eyes darted away. Tall, thin, always watching. You'll know when he chooses you. A chill settled over me. He'd already chosen. The return to the basement. That night, against every instinct, I returned to the basement. The smell was stronger than ever. My flashlight beam wavered as I moved toward the wall with the scratches. Only this time, there were fresh words. Words that hadn't been there before. "Welcome back." As I stayed, the bulb overhead flickered. The shadows shifted, and from the corner of the room, a tall figure began to emerge. He didn't step forward all at once. First, I saw his hand, long, bony fingers that scraped against the stone as though testing the air. Then his shoulder, hunched and sharp. Finally, his face, or what was left of it. Hollow sockets where eyes should have been. A mouth stretched too wide, teeth glinting like broken glass. He leaned toward me, his head jerking unnaturally, and whispered in a voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "I remember you." My flashlight sputtered out. The basement fell into suffocating blackness. And in the dark, something cold and wet brushed against my hand. I stumbled up the basement stairs in blind panic, slamming the door behind me so hard the frame cracked. My hand shook uncontrollably. That face, or the absence of it, was burned into my mind. The hollow sockets, the voice that seemed to come from every corner of the house at once. I should have left then, thrown my things into the car and never looked back. But fear is a strange way of holding you in place, pinning you where you stand. And somewhere deep inside, I knew leaving wouldn't matter, because he wasn't bound to the basement. He was bound to me. The house wakes. That night, the house came alive. It began with the walls. They pulsed like they were breathing, the plaster bulging and contracting as though veins ran beneath it. Then came the voices. Not whispers anymore, but full conversations in overlapping tones, none of them clear, all of them urgent. I pressed my palms against my ears, but the voices only grew louder, inside my head now, chanting, laughing, begging. In the kitchen, every cabinet door slammed open at once. In the hallway, family photos shook so violently they cracked, the glass splintering across the floor. By the time I reached the living room, the air had grown so cold I could see my breath. And he was waiting for me. The figure. He stood by the fireplace, taller than I remembered. His body stretched wrong, like his bones had been rearranged by someone who didn't understand human anatomy. His hollow eyes fixed on me. His mouth split into that jagged grin. "You came back," he rasped. The sound wasn't just in the room. It was in my chest, vibrating through my ribs. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Finally, I forced out, "What do you want from me?" His grin widened. "I want what I was promised." The promise. I didn't understand at first. But then a memory surfaced. I was 8 years old, lying awake in this very house, terrified of the shadows. That was when Aunt Margaret had come in. She'd knelt beside my bed, stroked my hair, and whispered, "Don't worry, sweetheart. He won't hurt you. He told me so. He said he'll wait." I had forgotten those words until now. But standing there in the living room, I realized the truth. My aunt hadn't been protecting me. She had been bargaining with him. She promised him I'd come back. The attack. The figure lunged, faster than something that size should move. His hands closed around my shoulders, ice cold, his grip crushing. I screamed and thrashed, but he only pulled me closer, his face inches from mine. "Yours now," he whispered. The walls around us shuddered. From every corner of the room, black shapes began to crawl, shadows peeling themselves off the plaster, scuttling across the floor. Dozens of them, hundreds, all converging on me. I fought harder, kicking, clawing, desperate to break free. My hand struck something on the mantel, an old lighter my dad used to keep there. Without thinking, I flicked it and thrust a flame toward his hollow face. For the first time, he recoiled. The shadows shrieked, retreating into the walls. His grip loosened, and I stumbled backward. Fire. That was the key. The fire. I don't remember making the decision. My body just moved. I grabbed the nearest thing, a dusty curtain, and set it alight. The flame spread quickly, racing up the wall, devouring the dry wood and fabric. The figure screamed, a sound that wasn't human. His body flickered, glitching in and out of sight like static. The house roared around me, the walls vibrating with fury. But the fire spread faster than the shadows could retreat. I bolted out the front door as flames consumed the windows. The night air hit my face as smoke billowed into the sky. Behind me, the house groaned, shuddered, and finally collapsed into itself, sending sparks into the darkness. Aftermath. The fire department called it an accident. Old wiring, they said. No one questioned me too closely. But I know the truth. The house didn't burn because of faulty wires. It burned because I forced it to. Because it was the only way to make sure he stayed inside. Or so I thought. Epilogue. It's been 3 months. I've moved into a small apartment across town, trying to start over. But some nights, always around 3 a.m., I wake to the smell of smoke. And in the corner of my bedroom, where the shadows gather deepest, I see him. Tall, hollow-eyed, grinning. The house may be gone, but he never needed the house. He needed me.